The metallic taste of blood and betrayal still fills my mouth when I remember the manufacturum fires on Graia. My name is Servo-Skull Tertius-9, witness to 10,000 battles, keeper of forgotten records, and I carry the complete testimony of Captain Demetrian Titus of the Ultramarines. You think you know his story from the sanitized reports and propaganda reels, but you don't understand what truly happened in those burning foundries, or why the Codex Astartes failed him when he needed it most. Titus wasn't just another space marine following orders. He was a warrior who proved that honor sometimes requires breaking the very rules that define it. The Inquisition branded him suspicious, his own brothers questioned his methods, and the galaxy forgot his sacrifices while celebrating lesser heroes. You think this makes me just another Servo-Skull recycling old battle data, but you don't know what I witnessed in those final moments when Titus chose humanity over doctrine, salvation over protocol. Chapter 1. Forged in Ultramar. The first memory in my databanks begins with the sound of plasma coils charging in the depths of Macragge's fortress monastery, where a young initiate named Demetrian was undergoing the final stages of his transformation into one of Robert Guilliman's chosen sons. The year was 832 M41, and the Ultramarines were at the height of their glory, their reputation as the Emperor's finest serving as both inspiration and burden for every neophyte who sought to join their ranks. Demetrian's origins were humble by Ultramarine standards. The son of a minor manufacturum overseer on the industrial world of Talassar, one of Ultramar's 8 core systems. His childhood had been spent among the massive production facilities that supplied equipment and materials to the chapter's war machine, watching as ordinary humans labored to support the superhuman warriors who protected their realm. This early exposure to the intersection between civilian life and military necessity would shape his understanding of what Space Marines truly fought to preserve. The recruitment process had been brutal, even by Adeptus Astartes standards. From a pool of 10,000 candidates, only 300 had survived the initial testing phases that evaluated physical prowess, mental resilience, and spiritual purity. The trials continued for months, each stage designed to eliminate those who lacked the extraordinary qualities required for successful transformation into a Space Marine. Demetrian had distinguished himself not through superior physical capabilities, though his scores were certainly adequate, but through his ability to maintain focus on mission objectives while adapting to rapidly changing circumstances. During the Crucible of Malediction trial, where candidates were required to navigate a maze of death traps while carrying wounded comrades to safety, he had demonstrated the kind of tactical flexibility and protective instinct that exemplified Ultramarines' values. The trial that truly set him apart occurred during the Test of Moral Resolve, where candidates faced scenarios designed to evaluate their commitment to protecting innocent life versus completing assigned objectives. Many promising recruits failed this stage by choosing tactical efficiency over civilian preservation, demonstrating the kind of cold pragmatism that the Ultramarines considered incompatible with their noble mission. Demetrian's response had been different. When presented with a scenario where completing his objective quickly would result in civilian casualties, but protecting the civilians would jeopardize mission success, he had found a third option, a complex tactical approach that preserved both lives and objectives through careful coordination and personal risk-taking that went beyond standard protocols. Captain Severus Agamemnon, who oversaw the final selection process, noted in his assessment that young Demetrian demonstrated exceptional capacity for independent tactical thinking while maintaining absolute commitment to Ultramarines' principles. This combination of innovation and loyalty would define his entire career, though it would also create tensions with more orthodox interpretations of Codex doctrine. The physical transformation process had proceeded smoothly, with Demetrian's body accepting each genetic modification without the complications that claimed approximately 30% of candidates during the enhancement stages. The implantation of additional organs, the black carapace, the os modula, the Susan membrane, had integrated perfectly with his existing physiology, creating the enhanced capabilities that would make him a formidable warrior. But it was the psychological conditioning that truly forged Demetrian into a space marine. The hypno-doctrination sessions that imprinted tactical knowledge, historical understanding, and behavioral programming were supplemented by extensive study of the Codex Astartes and meditation on the philosophical principles that guided Ultramarines' conduct. Master of Sanctity Cassius personally oversaw aspects of Demetrian's spiritual development, recognizing in the young initiate a capacity for the kind of moral leadership that the chapter would need in the increasingly complex conflicts of the 41st millennium. Cassius emphasized that adherence to the Codex was not blind obedience, but thoughtful application of proven principles to novel situations. The Codex is not a cage that constrains our actions, Cassius taught during one of their private sessions. It is a foundation upon which we build responses to whatever challenges the Emperor places before us. A true Ultramarine understands both the letter and the spirit of Guilliman's teachings. This nuanced understanding of Codex interpretation would later prove crucial during Demetrian's most challenging moments, when strict adherence to established protocols would have produced disastrous results. But during his training phase, it simply marked him as a thoughtful student who grasped the deeper principles underlying tactical doctrine. The neophyte's first combat deployment came during the cleansing of Korath, where Chaos cultists had seized control of several industrial complexes and were using them to manufacture weapons for planned uprisings throughout the sector. The operation was intended as a training mission for new Ultramarines, allowing them to gain experience in relatively low-risk combat situations. Demetrian served as part of Squad Veteran Sergeant Marcianus's tactical unit, carrying out precision strikes against cultist positions while minimizing damage to essential infrastructure. The mission parameters emphasized protection of civilian workers who'd been trapped in the facilities when the cultists seized control, requiring careful coordination between assault elements and evacuation teams. The young Space Marine's performance during the Korath operation demonstrated the qualities that would define his career. When his squad encountered a group of cultists using captured workers as human shields, standard protocols called for the deployment of non-lethal suppression techniques that would incapacitate everyone in the area, allowing subsequent sorting of combatants from non-combatants. But Demetrian recognized that the civilians were already weakened by exposure to industrial chemicals that the cultists had released during their takeover. Non-lethal weapons that would merely stun healthy individuals could prove fatal to people whose systems were already compromised by toxic exposure. Instead of following the standard protocol, he had requested permission to attempt a more complex approach that would neutralize the cultists without exposing the civilians to additional chemical stress. Sergeant Marcianus granted permission, curious to see how his newest squad member would handle the challenge. Demetrian's solution involved using his knowledge of the facility's industrial systems to create a localized electromagnetic pulse that disabled the cultists' equipment while leaving their biological functions unaffected. The approach required precise technical execution and exposed him to significantly greater personal risk, but it successfully resolved the situation without harming any of the civilian hostages. The incident was noted in his service record as an example of innovative tactical thinking combined with exceptional concern for civilian welfare. But it also marked him as someone who might be inclined to deviate from established procedures when he believed alternative approaches were more appropriate. Following his successful completion of neophyte training, Demetrian was assigned to the 4th Company under Captain Uriel Ventris, whose own reputation for flexible interpretation of Codex doctrine made him an ideal mentor for a young Marine with similar inclinations. Ventris recognized in Demetrian the same qualities that had led to his own advancement within the chapter hierarchy: courage, intelligence, and most importantly, understanding that true loyalty sometimes required challenging conventional wisdom. The early years of Demetrian's service were marked by steady advancement through the ranks as he demonstrated exceptional competence in diverse combat environments. Whether fighting Orc raiders in the void between worlds or purging Genestealer infestations from Hive City depths, he consistently exhibited the tactical acumen and moral clarity that exemplified Ultramarines' ideals. His promotion to sergeant came during the defense of Calth's Shadow, where Tyranid splinter fleets had established footholds on several worlds throughout Ultramar. Demetrian's squad had been assigned to support evacuation operations, while other elements engaged the alien swarms directly. The mission seemed routine until reconnaissance revealed that the Tyranids were using captured civilians as biological material for rapid organism production. The discovery created a tactical dilemma that tested both Demetrian's skills and his principles. Standard doctrine called for prioritizing the elimination of Tyranid production capabilities over rescue operations, accepting the loss of captured civilians to prevent the aliens from creating larger forces. But the captured humans were still alive and could potentially be saved if rescue operations were initiated immediately. Demetrian made the decision to split his forces, using half his squad to maintain suppression fire against Tyranid positions, while leading the remainder in a high-risk assault on the alien processing facilities. The approach violated several tactical principles about maintaining unit cohesion and avoiding unnecessary risks, but it successfully rescued over 200 civilians while completing the primary objective. Captain Ventress's after-action report praised Demetrian's exceptional tactical initiative and unwavering commitment to protecting innocent life even under the most challenging circumstances. The successful rescue operation, combined with his demonstrated leadership capabilities, led to his promotion to sergeant and assignment to command his own tactical squad. But perhaps more significant than the promotion was the recognition that Demetrian possessed the rare combination of tactical skill and moral conviction that marked potential future leaders of the chapter. His willingness to take personal risks to protect others, combined with his ability to find innovative solutions to complex problems, suggested that he might one day be worthy of company command. The Servo-Skull archives contain detailed records of Demetrian's continuing service throughout the late 41st millennium, each campaign building his reputation as both an effective warrior and a principled leader. His methods were sometimes unconventional, his interpretations of doctrine occasionally creative, but his results consistently vindicated his choices. Yet even during these successful early years, there were signs of the challenges that would later define his most famous battles. His tendency to prioritize civilian protection over tactical efficiency, his willingness to exceed his authority when he believed lives were at stake, and his ability to inspire unusual loyalty among both his own troops and the ordinary humans they protected. All of these qualities would prove both essential and problematic during the events that would make him one of the most controversial Space Marines in Ultramarines history. The young sergeant who emerged from these formative campaigns was recognizably the same man who would later stand alone against impossible odds on Graia, choosing principle over protocol and accepting personal sacrifice to preserve what he believed the Emperor wanted humanity to become. But the path from promising young leader to legendary hero would prove more complex and costly than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 2: The Making of a Captain. The promotion that would define the rest of Demetrian's career came during the aftermath of the Damocles Gulf Crusade, when the Ultramarines were restructuring their command hierarchy to address the evolving threats facing Ultramar. Captain Ventress had been elevated to lead a special task force dealing with emergent Xenos threats, creating a vacancy in the 4th Company that required immediate filling by someone with both tactical expertise and the moral authority to lead Ultramarines into the increasingly complex conflicts of the late 41st millennium. The selection process involved extensive evaluation by the chapter's senior leadership, including personal interviews with Chapter Master Marneus Calgar and Chief Librarian Tigurius. The position demanded not merely combat competence. The Ultramarines had no shortage of skilled warriors, but the kind of strategic thinking and inspirational leadership that could adapt to threats that didn't conform to established tactical doctrines. Sergeant Demetrian's service record painted a portrait of exceptional capability, combined with occasional willingness to interpret orders creatively when circumstances demanded innovative responses. His successful leadership during the Pylon Gate incident had demonstrated his ability to coordinate complex multi-unit operations, while maintaining focus on both primary objectives and secondary considerations like civilian protection. The Pylon Gate operation had been typical of the challenges facing Ultramarines forces throughout the galaxy, a seemingly straightforward mission that evolved into something far more complex than initial intelligence suggested. Dark Eldar raiders had established a temporary base on the abandoned mining world of Xerion Prime, using it as a staging point for slave raids throughout the sector. Standard protocols called for a rapid strike to destroy the Dark Eldar facility and eliminate the raiding threat before the aliens could relocate their operations. Intelligence indicated minimal civilian presence on the world, making it an ideal target for the kind of aggressive tactics that the Ultramarines employed against Xenos threats that posed danger to Imperial citizens. But when Demetrian's force arrived at Xerion Prime, they discovered that recent refugees from other worlds had established hidden settlements in the abandoned mining complexes, creating a civilian population that intelligence had failed to detect. The Dark Eldar were aware of these settlements and were using them as hunting grounds, capturing humans for their twisted entertainment while maintaining their main operations in the heavily fortified central facility. The discovery created an immediate tactical problem. The original plan called for orbital bombardment followed by ground assault, eliminating the Dark Eldar threat quickly and efficiently. But such tactics would also kill the hidden civilian populations, transforming a rescue operation into a massacre that violated fundamental Ultramarines principles. Demetrian had requested authorization to modify the mission parameters, developing an alternative approach that would protect the civilian settlements while still eliminating the Dark Eldar threat. His proposal involved simultaneous ground assaults on multiple targets, using his forces to create corridors that would allow civilian evacuation while preventing Dark Eldar escape. The modified plan was significantly more complex and dangerous than the original approach, requiring precise coordination between different squad elements while operating in terrain that favored the highly mobile Dark Eldar forces. Command authorization came with explicit warnings that Demetrian would be held personally responsible if the mission failed due to overextension or tactical complications. The operation's execution demonstrated why Demetrian had been considered for promotion to company command. Rather than simply dividing his forces equally among the various objectives, he had analyzed the specific capabilities required for each task and assigned squads according to their specialized strengths. Heavy weapons specialists were positioned to provide suppression fire that would pin down Dark Eldar forces while evacuation proceeded, while assault specialists conducted rapid strikes against key positions. Most critically, Demetrian had recognized that the civilians themselves could serve as tactical assets rather than simply objectives to be protected. Working through local leaders, he had organized the refugees into evacuation groups that could move efficiently through prepared routes while providing intelligence about Dark Eldar movements and positions. The integration of civilian cooperation into military planning was unconventional, but proved highly effective. The refugees' intimate knowledge of the mining complex layouts allowed Ultramarines forces to navigate terrain that would have been extremely challenging using standard reconnaissance alone. Their first-hand observations of Dark Eldar behavioral patterns provided tactical intelligence that proved crucial for predicting enemy responses. The battle itself unfolded across multiple fronts simultaneously, testing Demetrian's ability to maintain strategic coherence while adapting to rapidly changing local conditions. Dark Eldar raiders proved predictably aggressive, but also demonstrated the tactical flexibility that made them such dangerous opponents. When initial positions became untenable, they rapidly redeployed to new locations that exploited weaknesses in the Ultramarines' extended formations. But Demetrian's planning had anticipated such adaptations. Rather than committing all his forces to fixed positions, he had maintained mobile reserves that could respond to unexpected developments. When Dark Eldar forces attempted to outflank the main evacuation route, reserve squads were already positioned to intercept them. When the aliens tried to collapse mining tunnels to trap civilian groups, engineering specialists were ready with countermeasures. The operation's climax came when Dark Eldar leadership attempted to escape through a hidden webway portal that intelligence had failed to detect. Standard protocols would have required allowing the escape rather than risking force coherence to pursue fleeing enemies. But Demetrian recognized that allowing Dark Eldar leaders to escape would simply result in renewed raids against other Imperial worlds. His decision to pursue the fleeing aliens required dividing his forces at the moment when unity was most crucial for consolidating the victory. Half his command was committed to ensuring complete civilian evacuation, while the remainder pursued Dark Eldar forces through terrain that could easily become a trap for pursuing Imperial troops. The pursuit led through the abandoned industrial sections of the mining complex, where Dark Eldar engineers had prepared extensive booby traps and defensive positions designed to channel attackers into killing zones. Standard tactical doctrine would have called for careful reconnaissance and systematic clearance of each position, but such methodical approaches would have allowed the aliens sufficient time to complete their escape. Instead, Demetrian had led a rapid assault that accepted higher casualties in exchange for maintaining pressure on the retreating enemies. His personal leadership proved crucial. Space Marines who might have hesitated to follow such an aggressive approach were inspired by their sergeant's willingness to share the risks he was asking them to accept. The final confrontation occurred at the Webway portal itself, where Dark Eldar Archon Vexithai had prepared a last-ditch defense using captured human slaves as both shields and bait. The Archon's strategy was psychologically sophisticated. He understood that Imperial forces would hesitate to risk civilian casualties, giving his forces time to complete their escape while maximizing the moral injury inflicted on their pursuers. Demetrian's response demonstrated the tactical brilliance that would characterize his later career. Rather than accepting the tactical stalemate that the Archon intended, he had used the Ultramarines' superior equipment and coordination to create options that the Dark Eldar hadn't anticipated. Deploying smoke grenades and electromagnetic pulse devices, he had created conditions where Dark Eldar advantages in speed and precision were neutralized, while Ultramarines' advantages in durability and firepower were enhanced. The slaves were rescued through carefully coordinated extraction operations, while assault elements systematically eliminated the Dark Eldar defenders. The Archon's death came during personal combat with Demetrian himself, a confrontation that tested both his physical capabilities and his moral resolve. Vexithai was a warrior of centuries of experience whose enhanced reflexes and sophisticated weaponry made him a formidable opponent, even for a genetically enhanced Space Marine. But Demetrian's victory came not through superior combat prowess, but through superior purpose. While the Archon fought for personal glory and sadistic pleasure, the Space Marine fought to protect innocent lives and serve the Emperor's vision for humanity. That difference in motivation proved decisive when both warriors were pushed to their absolute limits. The successful completion of the Pylon Gate operation resulted in complete elimination of the Dark Eldar threat, while saving over 3,000 civilian refugees who would otherwise have become victims of alien depredation. The tactical innovation and moral leadership that Demetrian had demonstrated convinced chapter leadership that he possessed the qualities necessary for company command. Captain Ventress's recommendation was unequivocal. Sergeant Demetrian demonstrates exceptional tactical acumen combined with unwavering commitment to Ultramarines' principles. His ability to adapt standard doctrines to novel circumstances while maintaining focus on our core mission makes him ideally suited for independent command responsibilities. The formal promotion ceremony took place in the Hall of Heroes within Macragge's Fortress Monastery, where Demetrian swore the oaths of company command before assembled representatives of the chapter's leadership. Chapter Master Calgar personally presented him with the ceremonial power sword that would serve as both weapon and symbol of his authority. The rank of captain carries responsibilities that extend beyond mere tactical command, Calgar explained during the ceremony. You are now responsible not only for the lives of the Marines under your command, but for upholding the reputation and principles of the Ultramarines chapter in whatever conflicts the Emperor may require us to face. The assignment that accompanied his promotion would prove prophetic. Captain Demetrian was given command of a newly formed company tasked with responding to emergent threats that didn't fit standard operational categories. His mandate was to develop innovative approaches to unconventional conflicts, while maintaining strict adherence to Ultramarines' values and Imperial law. This assignment reflected the chapter leadership's recognition that the galaxy's strategic situation was evolving in ways that traditional tactical doctrines couldn't fully address. Chaos cults were becoming more sophisticated in their subversion techniques, Xenos threats were displaying unprecedented coordination across species lines, and even loyalist imperial institutions sometimes required intervention when corruption or incompetence threatened civilian populations. Captain Demetrian's new command would need to be equally adaptable, capable of conducting operations that range from conventional military actions to complex political interventions. His company would serve as both an elite combat force and a diplomatic tool, representing Ultramarines' interests in situations where standard approaches might prove inadequate. The personnel assigned to his command reflected this diverse mission profile. In addition to the standard tactical, assault, and devastator squads that formed the backbone of any Ultramarines company, Captain Demetrian received specialized units trained in reconnaissance, technical operations, and civilian coordination. His command staff included officers with backgrounds in intelligence analysis, logistics coordination, and interagency cooperation. Most significantly, his company was authorized to operate with greater independence than typical Ultramarines formations. While still bound by chapter doctrine and imperial law, Captain Demetrian could adapt his mission parameters to address local conditions without requiring detailed authorization from higher command levels. This operational flexibility would prove crucial during the campaigns that would define his reputation. The early deployments of Captain Demetrian's company established patterns that would characterize his entire command tenure. Whether responding to Orc incursions, investigating suspected Chaos infiltration, or providing disaster relief following industrial accidents, his forces consistently demonstrated superior tactical effectiveness while maintaining exceptional concern for civilian welfare. But they also demonstrated his continuing willingness to interpret orders creatively when he believed strict adherence to established protocols would produce suboptimal results. This tendency toward tactical innovation would eventually bring him to Graia, where conventional approaches would prove inadequate to address the threats facing both the Forge world and the broader Imperium. The captain who emerged from these formative command experiences was a leader of proven competence, whose methods sometimes challenged orthodox interpretations of proper procedure. His successes had earned him the respect of his subordinates and the cautious approval of his superiors, but they had also established him as someone who might be inclined to trust his own judgment over institutional guidance when the two came into conflict. Chapter 3. The Graia Deployment. The order that would forever change Captain Demetrian Titus's fate arrived through encrypted channels while his company was concluding operations against Orc raiders in the Kintara system. The message was brief and carried the highest priority classifications: immediate deployment to the Forge world Graia, where catastrophic events threatened both local imperial interests and broader strategic stability throughout the sector. Initial intelligence painted a dire picture. Graia's industrial production had ceased transmitting status reports 3 days earlier. Orbital reconnaissance detected massive explosions throughout the planet's primary manufacturing zones, and automated distress beacons indicated complete breakdown of planetary defense systems. Most concerning, intercepted Vox traffic suggested that the planet's Titan Legion was engaged in combat operations against unidentified enemies within their own base facilities. The strategic importance of Graia made immediate response essential, regardless of the tactical challenges involved. The Forge world's production capacity supplied critical equipment to dozens of Imperial Guard regiments. Its Titan Legion provided heavy support for major campaign operations throughout the sector, and its research facilities were developing advanced technologies that could influence the balance of power in ongoing conflicts across multiple fronts. Captain Titus received his mission briefing during the voyage to Graia, studying intelligence reports that raised more questions than they answered. The planet's industrial output had been proceeding normally until the sudden communications blackout, with no prior indications of internal unrest, external threats, or mechanical failures that might explain the catastrophic breakdown of all planetary systems. Orbital reconnaissance imagery revealed destruction patterns that didn't conform to any known threat profile. The damage was too extensive and coordinated for typical industrial accidents, but the targeting seemed random rather than following the systematic approach that would characterize planned military assault. Entire manufacturing complexes had been reduced to molten slag, while adjacent facilities remained completely undamaged. Most puzzling were the energy readings detected by long-range sensors. The Forge world's power systems were producing output levels far beyond normal operational parameters, as if massive additional demands were being placed on the planetary grid. But the nature of these energy demands was unclear. They didn't match the signatures of known Imperial technologies or typical Xenos weaponry. Lieutenant Mira, Captain Titus's intelligence officer, had compiled comprehensive threat assessments based on available data, but every analysis ended with the same conclusion: insufficient information for reliable tactical planning. The situation on Graia was unprecedented, requiring flexible response capabilities that could adapt to whatever conditions they discovered upon arrival. "Sir," Lieutenant Mira reported during the final approach briefing, "we're entering this operation essentially blind. Standard reconnaissance protocols assume we can identify enemy forces and assess their capabilities before committing to engagement. But current intelligence suggests we may be facing something completely outside our operational experience." The challenge was compounded by the limited forces available for the mission. Captain Titus's company had been operating independently for several months, sustaining casualties and equipment losses that hadn't been fully replaced due to the extended deployment schedule. His effective strength consisted of approximately 60 Space Marines, organized into mixed tactical and specialist squads, supported by limited air assets and no heavy armor beyond what could be deployed via drop pod. Against unknown enemies controlling an entire Forge world's industrial capacity, such forces would normally be considered grossly inadequate. Standard Imperial doctrine would call for extensive reconnaissance followed by systematic assault using overwhelming superiority in both numbers and firepower. But the strategic importance of Graia's production facilities made rapid response more critical than tactical caution. The insertion plan reflected these constraints while attempting to maximize the advantages of Ultramarines training and equipment. Rather than attempting to secure the entire planet, Captain Titus would focus on specific, high-value objectives, the primary manufacturing complexes that produced critical equipment for other Imperial forces, the Titan Legion's base facilities where loyal forces might still be holding defensive positions, and the central command bunkers from which planetary systems could potentially be restored to Imperial control. The approach to Graia revealed the scale of devastation that had befallen the Forge world. Entire Hive City sectors were burning with fires that had been raging for days, creating massive smoke columns that obscured orbital reconnaissance of ground-level conditions. The planet's industrial districts displayed the kind of systematic destruction that suggested deliberate sabotage rather than random violence or external bombardment. But most disturbing were the energy readings that became increasingly intense as they approached the planet's surface. Whatever was consuming Graia's power production had grown stronger during the voyage from Kintara, suggesting that the situation was continuing to deteriorate rather than stabilizing at current levels. Time was clearly critical if any Imperial assets were to be preserved. The drop pod insertion proceeded according to standard protocols, despite the challenging atmospheric conditions created by the widespread fires and industrial emissions. Captain Titus had selected a landing zone near the central manufacturing district that would provide access to multiple priority targets while minimizing exposure to the heaviest concentrations of apparent enemy activity. The moment his forces made planetfall, it became clear that they faced something far more dangerous than initial intelligence had suggested. The very air around the primary objectives crackled with unnatural energy that registered as dangerous levels of warp contamination on their detection equipment. This was no mere industrial accident or conventional military assault. Graia was experiencing some form of demonic incursion. The discovery transformed the mission parameters from complex security operation to potential exterminatus scenario. Demonic contamination on the scale indicated by their sensors could spread beyond the Forge world to threaten entire systems, making containment or elimination absolute strategic priorities. But it also meant that conventional tactics would prove inadequate against enemies that didn't follow the laws of physics or respond predictably to military pressure. Sergeant Sidonus, Captain Titus's most experienced non-commissioned officer, expressed the concerns that every Marine in the landing force was privately considering. "Sir, our equipment isn't designed for prolonged operations against major warp incursions. Standard ammunition and armor provide limited protection against demonic entities, and our force strength is inadequate for the kind of massive cleansing operation that usually handles this level of contamination. But retreat wasn't an option given the strategic stakes involved. If Graia's industrial capacity fell permanently under Chaos control, the resulting disruption to Imperial supply lines could compromise defensive operations throughout the sector. Entire campaign theaters depended on equipment and support that only Graia's forges could provide in sufficient quantities. Captain Titus made the decision that would define the rest of the operation. Rather than attempting to contain or eliminate the demonic presence through conventional assault, his forces would focus on identifying and disrupting whatever mechanisms were sustaining the incursion. Demons required specific conditions to maintain stability in the material universe. Find and eliminate those conditions, and the entities would be banished regardless of their individual combat capabilities. The tactical approach required splitting his already limited forces among multiple simultaneous objectives. Assault teams would engage obvious demonic manifestations to draw enemy attention, while specialist squads infiltrated the industrial complexes to gather intelligence about the incursion's source and nature. Technical specialists would attempt to access Graia's central data systems to determine whether loyal forces remained active elsewhere on the planet. The initial advance through Graia's outer industrial districts revealed the scope of transformation that had occurred since the communications blackout. Entire manufacturing facilities had been converted into what could only be described as demonic machine cults, where captured human workers were being used to produce weapons and equipment that violated every principle of Imperial technology. The corruption wasn't just supernatural, it was also technological, suggesting coordination between Chaos forces and elements of the planet's own tech priest hierarchy. Combat engagement with the corrupted defenders demonstrated why conventional tactics would prove inadequate. The enemy forces combined the technological sophistication of Graia's industrial base with the supernatural resilience of demonic enhancement. They possessed advanced weapons that could penetrate standard space marine armor while displaying regenerative capabilities that allowed them to continue fighting despite injuries that should have been immediately fatal. But Captain Titus also recognized tactical opportunities that hadn't been apparent from orbital reconnaissance. The demonic corruption that made individual enemies more dangerous also made them less coordinated as organized forces. Unlike disciplined military units that could adapt their tactics to changing battlefield conditions, the Chaos forces seemed driven by supernatural compulsions that made their responses predictable despite their enhanced individual capabilities. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Leandros identified patterns in the enemy deployment that suggested centralized coordination from specific locations. Rather than being randomly distributed throughout the industrial complex, the corrupted forces were concentrating around particular facilities that showed unusual energy signatures on their detection equipment. "Sir," Leandros reported over the tactical communications network, "the demon forces aren't just occupying these facilities, they're protecting them. Something in those locations is critical to maintaining their presence here. If we can identify and eliminate whatever they're guarding, we might be able to disrupt the entire operation." The insight led to a revised tactical approach that played to Ultramarines' strengths while addressing the unique challenges of the Graia situation. Instead of attempting direct assault against superior numbers of enhanced enemies, Captain Titus's forces would conduct precision strikes against the critical nodes that sustained the demonic incursion. The first target was a massive power generation facility where the energy readings suggested some form of warp-powered enhancement to the normal industrial systems. Intelligence indicated that demon-possessed tech priests were using the facility to channel warp energy directly into the planet's power grid, creating the conditions necessary for sustained demonic manifestation throughout the Forge world. The assault on the power facility required coordinating 3 separate squad elements through terrain that had been heavily fortified by enemies who possessed both advanced technology and supernatural capabilities. Captain Titus led the main assault force through the primary approaches, while specialized teams infiltrated through maintenance tunnels and vertical access shafts. The battle that followed tested every aspect of Ultramarines' training and equipment. The demon-possessed defenders fought with enhanced strength and resilience, while wielding weapons that combined Imperial technology with warp-spawned enhancements. Standard bolt rounds proved only marginally effective against enemies who could regenerate from wounds that should have been instantly fatal. But the Space Marines' superior training and coordination proved decisive advantages. While individual demon-possessed cultists might be more dangerous than typical human enemies, they lacked the tactical discipline and unit cohesion that made Ultramarines' formations so effective. Coordinated fire patterns and mutual support allowed the attackers to systematically eliminate defenders who fought as individuals rather than as organized units. The facility's central control chamber contained the source of the warp corruption, a massive ritual circle where captured Imperial tech priests were being used to channel demonic energy into Graia's industrial systems. The fusion of advanced technology with forbidden sorcery had created something that violated both Imperial doctrine and natural law. Captain Titus's decision to personally enter the ritual chamber and disrupt the ceremony would later become a source of controversy among the Inquisition investigators who reviewed the Graia operation. Standard protocols called for using ranged weapons to eliminate sorcerous threats from maximum distance, minimizing exposure to warp contamination that could corrupt even genetically enhanced Space Marines. But the technical complexity of the Daemon Tech fusion meant that simple destruction might not sufficiently disrupt the systems to prevent their restoration. Someone with both technical knowledge and supernatural resistance would need to manually reconfigure the machinery to ensure permanent shutdown of the corruption process. The chamber itself was a nightmare fusion of Imperial technology and chaos sorcery. Massive cogitator banks had been modified with organic components that pulsed with unnatural life, while ritual circles carved into the floor channeled energy patterns that hurt to observe directly. The tech priests at the center of the ceremony were barely recognizable as human. Their mechanical augmentations merged with demonic enhancements that turned them into living conduits for warp energy. The confrontation that followed tested not only Captain Titus's combat capabilities, but also his resistance to the kinds of psychic assault that demon-possessed enemies could employ. The corrupted tech priests attempted to overwhelm his mind with visions of failure and doubt, exploiting the natural concerns that any Space Marine might harbor about the righteousness of his cause or the wisdom of his choices. But Titus's response demonstrated the mental discipline that Ultramarines' conditioning was designed to provide. Rather than attempting to suppress the doubts and fears that the demons tried to amplify, he acknowledged them as natural human responses, while maintaining focus on his duty to protect innocent life and serve the Emperor's will. The successful disruption of the ritual chamber's operations created a cascade effect throughout Graia's industrial districts. As the warp-powered enhancements failed, daemon-possessed forces found their supernatural capabilities diminished, while loyal Imperial systems began reasserting control over planetary functions. The immediate threat of total planetary corruption was eliminated, though significant chaos forces remained active throughout the Forge world. Captain Titus's company had achieved their primary objective, preventing Graia's industrial capacity from falling under permanent chaos control. But the cost had been significant, and the method had raised questions about proper procedures for dealing with warp contamination that would eventually lead to formal Inquisition investigation. The successful completion of the power facility assault was only the beginning of the Graia operation. Other critical objectives remained, including the Titan Legion base, where Loyalist forces might still be holding defensive positions, and the central command bunkers that controlled planetary defense systems. Each target would present unique challenges that would test different aspects of Captain Titus's tactical judgment and moral resolve. Chapter 4: The Orc Invasion. The relative calm that followed the successful disruption of the Demon Tech corruption lasted approximately 6 hours before Graia's orbital defense sensors detected massive energy signatures approaching from the system's outer edge. Captain Titus's initial assumption was that Imperial reinforcements were arriving to assist with the Forge world's reclamation. But the sensor profiles quickly revealed something far more dangerous: a massive orc WAG fleet emerging from warp space and heading directly toward the planet. Warlord Grimskull's fleet comprised over 200 vessels ranging from captured Imperial cruisers to ramshackle Orc constructions held together by salvaged metal and sheer belligerence. Intelligence analysis based on ship configurations and behavioral patterns suggested a force numbering in the millions, with significant heavy armor and air support capabilities that would make them formidable opponents even for fully prepared planetary defenses. The timing of the Orc arrival was catastrophically unfortunate. Graia's defense systems were still compromised from the Demon incursion. Many of the planet's military installations remained under Chaos control or were too damaged to function effectively, and the civilian population was scattered throughout emergency shelters with minimal protection against orbital bombardment or ground assault. Captain Titus found himself facing an impossible tactical situation. His company's strength had been further reduced during the assault on the Daemon-corrupted power facilities, leaving him with approximately 50 effective Space Marines to defend critical installations against millions of Orc invaders. Standard Imperial doctrine would call for immediate evacuation of essential personnel while abandoning the planet's industrial infrastructure to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. But evacuating Graia would mean losing not only the Forge World's irreplaceable manufacturing capacity, but also the hundreds of thousands of civilian workers who couldn't be transported off-world before the Orcs established planetary control. The choice between preserving strategic assets and protecting innocent lives was exactly the kind of moral dilemma that tested the fundamental principles underlying Space Marine service. The decision that Captain Titus made would define both his reputation and his ultimate fate. Rather than choosing between evacuation and defense, he elected to attempt both simultaneously, organizing civilian protection while conducting delaying actions that would buy time for Imperial reinforcements to arrive. The approach required splitting his forces and accepting risks that violated standard tactical doctrine about maintaining unit cohesion and operational security. Sergeant Sidonus expressed the concerns that every Marine in the company was privately considering. "Sir, we don't have the numbers to hold multiple defensive positions against force levels this size. If we spread out to protect all the critical installations, we'll be too weak at each location to mount effective resistance. Standard doctrine would be to concentrate our forces and hold one position until reinforcements arrive." But Captain Titus recognized that standard doctrine was designed for situations where acceptable losses could be calculated in terms of strategic objectives rather than human lives. Graia's civilian population couldn't be abandoned to Orc depredation simply because protecting them complicated tactical planning. The Emperor's vision for humanity required protecting actual humans, not just abstract strategic interests. "Our mission is to preserve Imperial assets and protect Imperial citizens," Titus replied during the emergency planning session. "The civilians on Graia are Imperial assets just as much as the manufacturing equipment and Titan Legion facilities. We'll find a way to protect everything that can be protected while buying time for reinforcements to arrive and deal with the larger tactical problems." The defensive plan that emerged from these discussions reflected both the urgency of the situation and Captain Titus's continuing willingness to interpret orders creatively when circumstances demanded innovative responses. Rather than attempting to hold fixed positions against superior numbers, his forces would conduct mobile operations designed to disrupt Orc coordination while protecting key civilian concentration areas. The approach required detailed knowledge of Graia's industrial geography and the tactical capabilities of Orc forces. Warlord Grimskull's way was typical of Orc military organization. Individually formidable fighters operating under minimal central coordination, relying on overwhelming numbers and superior technology looted from defeated enemies rather than sophisticated tactical planning. But the Orcs' lack of strategic sophistication was offset by their adaptability and resilience in combat. They could absorb casualties that would shatter more disciplined forces while maintaining aggressive momentum that made defensive operations extremely challenging. Stopping Orc assaults required eliminating entire formations rather than simply inflicting acceptable loss levels. The initial Orc landings confirmed intelligence assessments about their force composition and tactical approach. Massive transports delivered thousands of warriors directly onto Graia's surface, while smaller assault craft provided air support and rapid deployment capabilities for specialized units. The landings were scattered throughout the planet's industrial zones, suggesting either poor coordination or deliberate strategy to overwhelm defensive responses through multiple simultaneous threats. Captain Titus's response demonstrated the tactical flexibility that had characterized his entire career. Rather than attempting to contest the landing zones directly, his forces conducted precision strikes against Orc communication and command elements, disrupting their ability to coordinate between different landing forces, while preserving Space Marine strength for more critical defensive operations. The first major engagement occurred at the manufacturing complex Delta 7, where Orc forces had landed directly on top of an emergency shelter housing over 3,000 civilian workers and their families. Standard Orc behavioral patterns suggested that they would either kill or capture the civilians for their own entertainment, making immediate intervention essential despite the tactical risks involved. The assault required coordinating simultaneous attacks against multiple Orc positions, while preventing enemy forces from using civilians as shields or hostages. Captain Titus led the main assault force, while specialist teams created diversions that drew Orc attention away from the shelter areas. The battle revealed both the advantages and limitations of Space Marine capabilities against Orc opponents. Individual Space Marines were clearly superior to Orc warriors in terms of training, equipment, and tactical coordination. But the sheer numbers involved meant that even successful combat encounters resulted in negligible reduction of overall enemy strength, while exposing the defenders to accumulating casualties they couldn't afford. Captain Titus's solution was to focus on tactical objectives that multiplied the effectiveness of limited forces. Rather than attempting to eliminate Orc units through direct combat, his teams targeted fuel supplies, ammunition depots, and command vehicles that were essential to sustaining Orc operations. Destroying these supporting elements could neutralize entire formations without requiring direct engagement with every individual warrior. The approach proved successful at Manufactorum Complex Delta 7, where the destruction of several fuel depots forced Orc forces to withdraw from positions they had been preparing to use for systematic assault on the civilian shelters. The evacuation proceeded successfully, despite continuing enemy pressure, demonstrating that limited forces could achieve significant protective objectives through careful target selection. But the tactical success was offset by intelligence reports indicating that Orc landings were continuing throughout the planet. Warlord Grimskull's forces showed no signs of the coordination problems that typically characterized Orc military operations. Their attacks were too well timed and too strategically focused to be explained by simple, opportunistic aggression. Lieutenant Mira's analysis suggested that the Orcs were receiving some form of tactical intelligence that allowed them to identify and target Graia's most vulnerable points. Their attacks consistently focused on locations where defensive preparations were incomplete, or where civilian populations were most concentrated, suggesting access to information that random assault patterns couldn't explain. "Sir," Lieutenant Mira reported during the evening tactical briefing, "the Orc attack patterns indicate either sophisticated reconnaissance capabilities or access to planetary intelligence networks. They're targeting locations that we've identified as critical but haven't had time to properly fortify. Someone is providing them with tactical information." The possibility that the Orc invasion was being supported by traitor elements within Graia's population created additional complications for defensive planning. Standard counter-infiltration protocols were designed for peacetime security operations, not active combat situations where potential traitors might be indistinguishable from legitimate civilians requiring protection. But Captain Titus also recognized that paranoia about potential betrayal could prove more damaging than actual sabotage if it led to protective forces treating civilian populations as potential enemies rather than people requiring assistance. The balance between necessary security measures and maintaining civilian cooperation was delicate under the best circumstances. The revelation of the source came during the second day of Orc operations, when communication intercepts revealed that Inquisitor Drogon's research facility had been compromised and was transmitting tactical intelligence to Chaos forces that were coordinating with the Orc invasion. The demon incursion that had initially brought Captain Titus to Graia had been only the beginning of a larger plan designed to deliver the Forge World's industrial capacity to enemies of mankind. The discovery transformed the tactical situation from conventional planetary defense to counterintelligence operation requiring simultaneous action against multiple enemy factions. Orc forces represented the immediate physical threat to civilian populations and strategic assets, but the chaos elements providing them with intelligence support were the ultimate source of coordination that made their attacks so devastatingly effective. Captain Titus made the decision to personally investigate Inquisitor Drogon's facility, while his remaining forces continued defensive operations against Orc attacks. The approach violated standard protocols about command personnel exposing themselves to unnecessary risks, but the intelligence requirements were too critical to delegate to subordinates who might lack the authority to make rapid decisions about complex situations. The infiltration of Drogon's facility required moving through terrain controlled by both Orc forces and chaos-corrupted defenders who were cooperating despite their traditional enmity. The cooperation itself was evidence of the supernatural coordination that was driving the assault on Graia. Normal Orc behavior patterns would never include sustained alliance with human forces, regardless of their mutual objectives. The facility's interior revealed the scope of corruption that had infected Graia's research operations. Inquisitor Drogon himself had been possessed by demon entities that were using his authority and knowledge to coordinate attacks against Imperial installations throughout the system. The research into advanced weapons technology that had been his legitimate mission had been perverted into development of warp-powered devices that violated both Imperial doctrine and natural law. The confrontation with the possessed Inquisitor tested Captain Titus's understanding of proper procedure for dealing with corrupted Imperial officials. Standard protocols called for immediate notification of higher Inquisition authorities who would determine appropriate responses to allegations of corruption within their ranks. But the tactical situation didn't allow time for bureaucratic procedures when immediate action could save thousands of lives. Titus's decision to engage the possessed Inquisitor directly rather than reporting the situation through proper channels would later become a source of controversy during post-operation investigations. His actions were tactically justified and morally necessary, but they also demonstrated continuing willingness to exceed his authority when he believed circumstances demanded immediate response. The battle against Drogon and his demon-possessed supporters combined conventional combat with the kind of supernatural conflict that Space Marines were trained to avoid whenever possible. The corrupted Inquisitor wielded psychic abilities enhanced by demon possession, creating tactical challenges that couldn't be resolved through superior firepower or tactical coordination alone. But Captain Titus's resistance to the psychic assault demonstrated exceptional mental discipline and spiritual purity that allowed him to function effectively despite exposure to warp corruption that would have overwhelmed most individuals. His ability to maintain focus on tactical objectives while resisting supernatural temptation would later be cited as evidence of either exceptional virtue or suspicious immunity to chaos influence. The successful elimination of Drogon and his supporters disrupted the intelligence coordination that had been making Orc attacks so devastatingly effective. Without detailed tactical information about Imperial defensive preparations, Warlord Grimskull's forces reverted to the kind of uncoordinated aggression that was more typical of Orc military operations and much easier for trained Imperial forces to counter. The tactical shift allowed Captain Titus's remaining forces to consolidate defensive positions around the most critical civilian concentration areas while conducting mobile operations that exploited Orc coordination problems. The Forge world remained under attack, but the immediate threat of systematic destruction was reduced to manageable levels. The success in neutralizing the intelligence leak also opened communications channels that allowed contact with other Imperial forces operating elsewhere on Graia. Titan Legion elements had been maintaining defensive positions around their primary base facilities, while scattered Planetary Defense Force units were conducting guerrilla operations against Orc positions throughout the industrial sectors. The coordination of these scattered resistance efforts required the kind of strategic thinking that tested Captain Titus's ability to operate beyond his formal authority while maintaining cooperation with Imperial forces that weren't technically under his command. His solutions would prove both effective and controversial as the Graia operation continued to unfold. Chapter 5. The Chaos Revelation. The discovery that transformed Captain Titus's mission from planetary defense to something far more sinister came during his investigation of Inquisitor Drogon's private research chambers, where classified materials revealed the true scope of the conspiracy that had brought both demon and orc forces to Graia. The Forge world hadn't simply fallen victim to coincidental attacks by different enemy factions. It had been deliberately targeted as part of a coordinated plan to acquire advanced Imperial technology for use against the Imperium itself. Inquisitor Drogon's personal files contained communications with unnamed contacts within the Adeptus Mechanicus hierarchy, discussing research projects that violated fundamental prohibitions against Xenos technology integration and warp-based enhancement systems. The correspondence revealed that Drogon had been using his Inquisition authority to pursue technological developments that conventional Imperial doctrine would classify as heretical innovation, deserving immediate exterminatus response. The project at the center of these forbidden research efforts was designated Psychic Scourge, a weapons system that combined captured Necron technology with warp channeling mechanisms designed to amplify psychic destructive potential beyond anything in the current Imperial arsenal. Theoretical projections suggested that successful deployment could eliminate entire planetary populations while leaving infrastructure intact for immediate occupation by conquering forces. Captain Titus realized that the demon incursion and orc invasion were not separate threats, but coordinated diversions designed to conceal the true objective: acquiring the Psychic Scourge prototype for use by Chaos forces planning major assaults against core Imperial worlds. The attacks on Graia's industrial facilities had been intended to create enough confusion and destruction to mask the removal of critical research materials. The implications extended far beyond Graia's immediate tactical situation. If Chaos forces gained access to weapons technology that combined Necron efficiency with warp enhancement, the strategic balance throughout entire sectors could shift decisively against Imperial interests. Forge worlds, hive cities, and even Space Marine fortress monasteries could become vulnerable to attacks that conventional defensive preparations were never designed to counter. But the technical complexity of the Psychic Scourge system meant that simply destroying Drogon's research facility wouldn't eliminate the threat. The weapon required specific combination of alien artifacts, Imperial technology, and psychically gifted operators working in precise coordination. Each component could be reproduced independently, making the complete system virtually impossible to eliminate through conventional military action. The revelation forced Captain Titus to reconsider every aspect of his mission priorities. Protecting Graia's civilian population and industrial capacity remained important, but preventing Chaos acquisition of superweapon technology had implications for Imperial security that transcended any single world's strategic value. The failure to secure or destroy the Psychic Scourge could result in catastrophic consequences across multiple systems. The challenge was complicated by the facility's location within Graia's most heavily industrialized sector, where ongoing combat between Imperial forces, Orc invaders, and Chaos cultists made systematic investigation extremely dangerous. Standard protocols would call for massive reinforcement followed by methodical clearance of all hostile forces before attempting to secure sensitive research materials. But intelligence intercepts indicated that Chaos forces were already implementing extraction procedures designed to remove critical components before Imperial reinforcements could arrive. Every hour of delay increased the probability that the weapon systems would disappear into the warp, only to reappear when Chaos forces had perfected their deployment capabilities. Captain Titus made the decision that would ultimately determine both the immediate outcome on Graia and his personal fate within the Imperial hierarchy. Rather than waiting for appropriate authorization and support, he would personally infiltrate the research complex and secure or destroy the Psychic Scourge prototype, using whatever resources were immediately available. The decision violated multiple levels of established protocol. Standard procedures required Inquisition oversight for any operation involving potentially heretical technology, Adeptus Mechanicus approval for handling advanced research materials, and direct authorization from Chapter Command before exposing Space Marine forces to supernatural threats of this magnitude. But Captain Titus also understood that bureaucratic procedures were designed for situations where time constraints didn't override normal decision-making processes. The tactical situation on Graia meant that following proper procedures would guarantee mission failure while exposing larger Imperial interests to unacceptable strategic risks. Sergeant Sidonus expressed the concerns that every experienced Space Marine would recognize. "Sir, we're talking about infiltrating a facility that contains unknown alien technology combined with active warp contamination. Our squad doesn't have the specialized equipment or technical knowledge to safely handle either component, let alone both in combination." The objection was tactically sound, but strategically irrelevant. Captain Titus's forces represented the only Imperial assets currently positioned to prevent chaos acquisition of weapons technology that could shift the balance of power throughout entire campaign theaters. Risking 6 Space Marines to preserve strategic stability for entire sectors was not just acceptable, it was mandatory regardless of personal consequences. "We have the training and equipment to adapt to whatever situations we encounter," Titus replied during the final mission briefing. "Ultramarines succeed because we maintain focus on objectives regardless of tactical complications. Our objective is preventing enemies of mankind from acquiring weapons that could be used against innocent Imperial citizens. Everything else is secondary." The infiltration approach required careful coordination between assault elements and technical specialists, with Captain Titus leading a small team through the facility's most heavily defended sections, while support elements created diversions that would draw enemy attention away from the primary objective areas. The plan was necessarily flexible since intelligence about internal conditions remained fragmentary. The facility's external appearance revealed the scope of corruption that had infected Drogon's research operations. What had once been a standard Imperial research complex now displayed architectural modifications that violated both engineering principles and aesthetic sensibilities. Massive spires channeled energy in patterns that hurt to observe directly, while defensive positions were designed to protect against threats approaching from multiple dimensional angles. The first indication of the supernatural dangers involved came when Captain Titus's team encountered defensive systems that combined Imperial security technology with Necron automation and demon-possessed machine spirits. The hybrid systems displayed tactical capabilities that exceeded anything in current Imperial experience. They could anticipate attack patterns while adapting their responses in ways that suggested independent reasoning rather than simple programming. Combat against these hybrid defenders required constant tactical adaptation, since standard approaches proved ineffective against enemies that learned from each engagement and modified their behaviors accordingly. Every successful assault technique became less effective in subsequent encounters, forcing the attackers to develop new approaches continuously rather than relying on proven methods. But the Space Marines' superior training and battlefield experience proved decisive advantages. While the mechanical defenders could adapt their programming, they couldn't develop the intuitive understanding of combat dynamics that came from years of experience facing diverse opponents. Captain Titus's team could recognize patterns and anticipate responses in ways that purely logical systems couldn't match. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Leandros identified weaknesses in the hybrid system's integration protocols. The combination of different technological bases created interface problems that could be exploited by targeting specific system components, rather than attempting to overwhelm the defensive networks entirely. "Sir," Leandros reported over the tactical communication network, "these systems are powerful individually, but they're not perfectly coordinated. If we can force them to operate at maximum capacity simultaneously, their power requirements exceed available supply levels. They'll have to choose between offensive capabilities and defensive functions." The tactical approach that emerged from this insight required coordinating multiple assault vectors designed to force the defensive systems into operational conflicts that would create exploitable vulnerabilities. Rather than attempting direct assault against superior firepower, the Space Marines would manipulate enemy responses to create favorable tactical conditions. The strategy proved successful in penetrating the facility's outer defensive perimeters, but it also revealed the scope of corruption that had infected the research operations themselves. The interior chambers contained a fusion of Imperial, alien, and demonic technologies that violated fundamental principles underlying the Omnissiah's sacred knowledge. Massive cogitator banks had been integrated with Necron processing matrices that operated according to alien logic patterns incomprehensible to human understanding. Warp channeling devices drew energy from the immaterium through configurations that would normally result in immediate demon possession of anyone in proximity. The combination should have been impossible according to established technological principles. But the system was not only functional, it was producing results that exceeded theoretical performance parameters for any individual component. The fusion of different technological approaches had created capabilities that none could achieve independently, suggesting either unprecedented engineering innovation or supernatural intervention that transcended natural law. At the center of the complex, Captain Titus discovered Inquisitor Drogan himself, though the figure barely resembled anything that could be called human. The Inquisitor's body had been modified with technological and biological enhancements that integrated imperial augmetics, alien implants, and demonic mutations in ways that created something entirely outside normal categorization. Drogan's consciousness remained partially intact, allowing communication that revealed the philosophical framework justifying his heretical research. He claimed that the threats facing humanity had grown beyond the capacity of conventional imperial technology to address, requiring integration of any effective capabilities, regardless of their origins or compatibility with established doctrine. "The galaxy is ending, Captain," Drogan explained with voices that harmonized in impossible ways. "Chaos grows stronger with every passing century, alien empires expand their territorial claims, and internal corruption weakens the Imperium from within. Orthodox approaches to these challenges have proven inadequate for over 10 millennia. Survival requires adaptation that transcends traditional limitations." The argument possessed internal logic that was difficult to refute on purely practical grounds. Imperial military forces were indeed struggling to maintain effective responses to threats that seemed to grow more sophisticated and coordinated with each passing generation. Traditional technologies and tactical approaches that had served humanity well for thousands of years were proving increasingly inadequate against enemies who adapted and evolved. But Captain Titus also recognized that Drogan's solutions violated the fundamental principles that made imperial civilization worth preserving in the first place. Humanity's value didn't derive from military efficiency or technological superiority. It came from the moral framework that distinguished human aspirations from the simple pursuit of power that motivated humanity's enemies. "Survival without honor is just another form of defeat," Titus replied while preparing for the confrontation that would determine both their fates. "If we become the same as our enemies in order to fight them more effectively, then our victory would be meaningless, even if we achieved it." The battle that followed tested every aspect of Captain Titus's capabilities against an opponent who possessed advantages that transcended normal combat parameters. Drogan's enhanced body combined Space Marine genetic modifications, Necron self-repair systems, and demonic resilience to create something that could absorb damage, that would destroy conventional opponents while regenerating lost capabilities within minutes. The Inquisitor's weaponry was equally beyond normal categories. Energy weapons channeled power through both technological and supernatural mechanisms, creating effects that ignored standard defensive measures. Projectile weapons fired ammunition that could phase through armor to inflict damage directly on biological targets. Psychic attacks bypassed mental defenses by operating through dimensional approaches that conventional training hadn't anticipated. But Captain Titus's advantages were equally significant, though they operated through different principles. His tactical training allowed him to recognize patterns in Drogan's combat behavior that suggested the integrated systems weren't perfectly coordinated. His moral certainty provided psychological resistance to psychic attacks designed to exploit doubt and fear. Most importantly, his commitment to protecting innocent life gave him motivation that transcended personal survival considerations. The decisive moment came when Captain Titus realized that Drogan's enhanced capabilities required constant energy input from the psychic scourge system to maintain stability. The various technological and supernatural modifications were inherently incompatible. Only continuous power channeling prevented them from rejecting each other and destroying their host. Rather than continuing direct combat against an opponent whose advantages made victory unlikely, Titus focused on disrupting the power supply systems that sustained Drogon's enhancements. The approach required exposing himself to extreme danger while manipulating complex machinery under combat conditions, but it offered the only realistic possibility for mission success. The destruction of the Psychic Scourge power core created cascade failures throughout the research facility's integrated systems. Drogon's enhanced body began rejecting its incompatible modifications as the supernatural energy that maintained their stability dissipated. The combination of alien technology, imperial augmetics, and demonic mutations consumed itself in processes that were as horrific as they were inevitable. The facility's collapse eliminated both the immediate threat and any possibility that Chaos forces could acquire functional Psychic Scourge technology. But it also exposed Captain Titus to levels of warp contamination that would later raise questions about his continued suitability for Space Marine service. The successful completion of the mission preserved Imperial strategic interests at the cost of raising suspicions about the methods and motivations that had made success possible. Captain Titus had saved Graia and prevented catastrophic technological proliferation, but he had done so through choices that challenged orthodox interpretations of proper procedure and appropriate authority. Chapter 6: The Final Battle. The climactic confrontation that would define Captain Titus's legacy began with the arrival of Warlord Grimskull himself at the ruins of Inquisitor Drogon's research facility. The massive Orc warboss had come to claim the Psychic Scourge technology for himself, unaware that the destruction of the power core had rendered the weapons system permanently inoperable. But his presence, along with the elite Nob bodyguard that accompanied him, transformed the tactical situation into the kind of personal combat that would test every aspect of Space Marine training and conditioning. Grimskull was a veteran of hundreds of battles across multiple sectors, his massive frame enhanced with the best looted technology that decades of successful raiding could provide. Captured Imperial bionics merged with Orc engineering and scavenged alien artifacts to create something that transcended normal Orc capabilities while retaining their natural resilience and aggression. Intelligence files suggested that he had personally killed over 30 Space Marines during his various campaigns, making him one of the most dangerous individual opponents that any Imperial force might encounter. The warboss's arrival coincided with the broader collapse of Orc coordination throughout Graia, as different clan elements began competing for control of the most valuable salvage opportunities. Without the supernatural guidance that Chaos corruption had provided, Warlord Grimskull's Wah was reverting to the kind of factional infighting that typically characterized Orc military operations during extended campaigns. But the disintegration of Orc unity also created new tactical challenges for Captain Titus and his remaining forces. Rather than facing coordinated assault from a single enemy faction, they now confronted multiple independent groups that might attack from any direction according to unpredictable decision-making processes. The lack of coordination made Orc forces less strategically dangerous, but more tactically unpredictable. The immediate tactical situation was further complicated by the continuing presence of demon-corrupted elements that had survived the destruction of Drogon's research facility. These entities were no longer receiving the supernatural support that had sustained them during the initial phase of the operation, but they remained dangerous opponents whose capabilities couldn't be predicted using conventional threat assessment procedures. Most significantly, Captain Titus found himself operating with minimal support from his original company's strength. Casualties sustained during the previous phases of the operation had reduced his effective forces to fewer than 20 Space Marines, while ammunition and equipment shortages limited their combat effectiveness against the numbers of enemies still active throughout Graia's industrial sectors. The decision to engage Warlord Grimskull directly rather than attempting to avoid contact until Imperial reinforcements arrived reflected Captain Titus's understanding of both tactical necessities and moral obligations. Allowing the Orc warboss to operate freely throughout Graia would result in massive civilian casualties as clan elements competed to impress their leader through displays of destructive capability. But the choice to accept personal combat against an opponent of Grimskull's reputation also reflected the kind of heroic ideal that had always defined Space Marine culture despite its practical risks. Sometimes tactical considerations had to be balanced against the inspirational value of personal courage, demonstrated under the most challenging circumstances possible. Sergeant Sidnus attempted one final effort to convince his captain to reconsider the tactical approach. "Sir, we could establish defensive positions and wait for reinforcements to arrive with appropriate heavy weapons support. Grimskull is just one orc, regardless of his individual capabilities. We don't need to risk command personnel against opponents that conventional firepower could eliminate more safely." The objection was tactically sound, but failed to address the broader implications of the strategic situation. Captain Titus understood that his actions on Graia would be evaluated not only in terms of immediate tactical success, but also as examples of Space Marine conduct that would influence future Imperial operations throughout the sector. "Our mission extends beyond simple objective completion," Titus explained to his assembled forces during what might be their final tactical briefing. "We represent the Emperor's will and humanity's determination to survive regardless of the odds. How we conduct ourselves here will influence how others respond to similar challenges in the future." The philosophical framework underlying this position reflected Captain Titus's understanding of Space Marine service as extending beyond mere military effectiveness to encompass moral leadership that inspired both Imperial forces and civilian populations. Individual heroism might be tactically inefficient, but it served essential psychological and spiritual functions that couldn't be achieved through purely pragmatic approaches. The approach to Warlord Grimskull's position required navigating terrain that had been extensively modified by ongoing combat operations. The research facility's destruction had created massive craters and debris fields that provided both cover and obstacles for advancing forces. Orc engineering efforts had established defensive positions using salvaged materials arranged according to their characteristic preference for overwhelming firepower over tactical subtlety. But Captain Titus also recognized tactical opportunities in the chaotic environment that careful planning could exploit. The Orc defensive positions were designed to repel frontal assaults by large numbers of attackers, not to counter infiltration by small teams of highly trained specialists. Space Marine capabilities in individual combat and technical expertise could potentially overcome advantages in numbers and firepower. The infiltration proceeded according to modified reconnaissance protocols, with Captain Titus leading a small team through approaches that avoided the heaviest concentrations of Orc defenders, while specialist elements created diversions designed to draw attention away from the primary assault route. The approach required careful timing and coordination, since discovery would result in immediate engagement against overwhelming odds. The facility's interior revealed the scope of destruction that had resulted from the Psychic Scourge power core's catastrophic failure. Entire sections had been reduced to molten slag, while other areas displayed structural damage that defied conventional understanding of material engineering. The combination of technological and supernatural destruction had created environmental hazards that were dangerous even to genetically enhanced Space Marines. But the destruction had also eliminated most of the demon-corrupted defenders that would have made infiltration impossible under normal circumstances. The few entities that remained active were operating at reduced capability levels, making them manageable opponents for experienced Space Marines using appropriate tactical procedures. The confrontation zone where Warlord Grimskull had established his command position was a massive chamber that had once housed the primary research equipment for Drogon's forbidden projects. The space now resembled an arena more than a laboratory, with makeshift bleachers constructed from salvaged materials, where elite nobs could observe their war boss demonstrate his combat prowess against worthy opponents. Grimskull himself occupied a throne constructed from the remains of various Imperial vehicles, his massive frame draped with trophies taken from defeated enemies across multiple campaign theaters. The sight was calculated to intimidate potential challengers while demonstrating the futility of resistance against Orc military superiority. But Captain Titus also observed tactical details that suggested exploitable weaknesses in the Orc leader's preparation. The arena configuration limited Grimskull's mobility while favoring opponents who could adapt to close-quarters combat conditions. The trophy decorations, while psychologically impressive, also provided potential improvised weapons or defensive materials for creative tactical applications. The formal challenge that initiated personal combat reflected Orc cultural traditions that treated individual prowess as the ultimate measure of leadership authority. Grimskull's position as war boss depended on his ability to defeat any challenger in direct confrontation, making personal combat the most efficient method for disrupting Orc command structure. "So, you're the Yumi that's been causing all the trouble on me world," Grimskull declared in accented Gothic, his voice amplified by Vox equipment looted from Imperial sources. "I've been looking forward to cracking your skull and adding it to me collection. Let's see if you can fight as good as you can run around blowing things up." Captain Titus's response reflected both tactical assessment and moral conviction. "I serve the Emperor of Mankind and protect his people from Xenos threats like you. Your presence on this world ends today, one way or another." The combat that followed tested every aspect of Space Marine training against an opponent whose capabilities exceeded normal Orc parameters, while retaining their characteristic tactical approach. Grimskull's enhanced strength allowed him to wield weapons that would require crew-served operation for normal combatants, while his looted armor provided protection equivalent to Space Marine power suits. But the Orc warboss's advantages were partially offset by tactical limitations that careful observation could exploit. His massive size reduced agility and reaction speed, while his preference for overwhelming force over tactical subtlety made his attack patterns predictable for opponents with superior training and experience. The battle evolved through multiple phases as both combatants adapted their approaches to counter their opponents' observed capabilities. Initial exchanges established the relative effectiveness of different weapon systems and fighting techniques, while subsequent phases involved increasingly sophisticated tactical approaches designed to exploit identified weaknesses. Captain Titus's breakthrough came when he recognized that Grimskull's enhanced capabilities were dependent on the various mechanical augmentations that the Orc had acquired through decades of successful looting. Rather than attempting to overcome the warboss's advantages through direct confrontation, he focused on disrupting the technological systems that provided those advantages. The approach required accepting significant personal risk while maneuvering into positions where precision attacks could target specific mechanical components. Standard Space Marine armor provided limited protection against weapons designed to penetrate similar defensive systems, while the close-quarters nature of the engagement eliminated most options for tactical withdrawal if the strategy proved unsuccessful. But Captain Titus's tactical training and combat experience provided advantages that transcended simple equipment comparisons. His ability to recognize patterns in Grimskull's combat behavior allowed him to anticipate attack sequences and position himself for effective counterattacks. His understanding of Imperial technology helped him identify critical vulnerabilities in the Orcs' looted augmentations. The decisive sequence began when Captain Titus successfully severed the power couplings that supplied energy to Grimskull's enhanced arm servos. The loss of mechanical assistance reduced the Orcs' combat effectiveness while creating openings for follow-up attacks against other critical system components. Grimskull's response demonstrated both his combat experience and his cultural conditioning. Rather than attempting to withdraw and repair his damaged systems, he escalated to more aggressive tactics that relied on his remaining natural capabilities. The approach was tactically unsound, but psychologically consistent with Orc leadership traditions that prioritized displays of personal courage over strategic calculation. The final phase of the confrontation tested Captain Titus's ability to maintain tactical effectiveness while sustaining the kind of physical damage that would incapacitate most combatants. Grimskull's weapons, even operated at reduced efficiency, remained capable of inflicting injuries that challenged the limits of Space Marine durability and regenerative capabilities. But the moral and spiritual framework that had guided Captain Titus throughout his career provided psychological resources that transcended physical limitations. His commitment to protecting innocent life and serving the Emperor's will gave him motivation that simple survival instinct couldn't match. The victory, when it came, was achieved through tactical skill rather than superior physical capability. Captain Titus's final attack targeted the Orc warboss's life support systems, rather than attempting to overcome his natural resilience through brute force. The precise application of combat expertise, rather than overwhelming superiority, determined the outcome. Warlord Grimskull's death created immediate disruption throughout the remaining Orc forces, as competing clan elements began fighting for succession rights, rather than maintaining pressure on Imperial positions. The elimination of unified command transformed the ongoing invasion from coordinated assault to chaotic factional conflict that Imperial forces could address using conventional tactical approaches. But the victory also came at personal cost that would influence Captain Titus's subsequent fate. The extended exposure to warp contamination, combined with physical injuries sustained during the final battle, raised questions about his continued fitness for Space Marine service that would require formal investigation by appropriate Imperial authorities. The successful completion of the Graia operation preserved both the Forge World's strategic value and the lives of hundreds of thousands of civilian workers who might otherwise have become victims of Orc or Chaos depredation. Captain Titus had achieved objectives that conventional tactical approaches would have deemed impossible given the available resources and tactical constraints. Yet the methods that had made victory possible, the willingness to exceed formal authority, the acceptance of extreme personal risk, the ability to resist corruption while operating in contaminated environments, also raised concerns about whether such capabilities indicated exceptional virtue or dangerous deviation from normal Space Marine conditioning. The questions that surrounded Captain Titus's performance on Graia would ultimately prove more significant than his tactical achievements, setting in motion the investigation and trial that would determine whether his service record represented a model for future Space Marines to emulate or a cautionary example of what happened when individual judgment replaced institutional discipline. Chapter 7. The Inquisition Investigation. The investigation that would ultimately determine Captain Titus's fate began before the last Orc forces had been eliminated from Graia's industrial sectors. Inquisitor Thrax of the Ordo Hereticus had been monitoring Imperial communications throughout the operation, analyzing after-action reports and tactical summaries for evidence of heretical behavior or unauthorized deviation from established protocols. Thrax's interest in the Graia situation had been triggered by reports of a Space Marine operating effectively in environments with extreme warp contamination, while displaying apparent immunity to corruption effects that would normally compromise even genetically enhanced warriors. Such capabilities could indicate either exceptional spiritual purity or dangerous susceptibility to chaos influence that had progressed beyond normal detection methods. The Inquisitor's preliminary analysis identified multiple incidents during Captain Titus's deployment that warranted detailed investigation. The direct engagement with demon-possessed enemies without appropriate Inquisition oversight, the destruction of potentially valuable research materials rather than securing them for proper analysis, and most concerning, the demonstrated ability to function normally after exposure to warp energies that should have required immediate quarantine and purification procedures. But Thrax was also aware that Captain Titus had achieved strategic objectives that preserved critical Imperial interests under circumstances where conventional approaches would almost certainly have failed. The preservation of Graia's industrial capacity, the protection of civilian populations, and the prevention of advanced weapons technology from falling into enemy hands were accomplishments that justified significant latitude in evaluating the methods that had made them possible. The investigation would need to balance these competing considerations while determining whether Captain Titus represented an exceptional asset to be preserved or a potential threat requiring elimination. The decision would influence not only one individual's fate, but also establish precedents for how the Imperium evaluated Space Marines who operated beyond normal parameters during critical missions. The formal investigation began with extensive debriefings of surviving members of Captain Titus's company, each interview conducted under psychic monitoring to ensure complete accuracy while identifying any signs of corruption or unusual influence. Sergeant Sidonus and Sergeant Leandros provided detailed testimony about their captain's behavior throughout the operation, though their perspectives differed significantly in ways that complicated simple assessment of the evidence. Sergeant Sidonus's testimony painted a portrait of exceptional leadership under the most challenging circumstances imaginable. He emphasized Captain Titus's consistent focus on protecting civilian populations, his tactical innovations that had allowed limited forces to achieve impossible objectives, and his personal courage in accepting extreme risks rather than asking subordinates to face dangers he wasn't willing to share. Captain Titus never asked any of us to do anything he wasn't prepared to do himself, Sidonus testified during his formal deposition. When we faced enemies that seemed impossible to defeat, he found ways to turn our disadvantages into tactical advantages. When we had to choose between completing missions and protecting innocent people, he found approaches that accomplished both objectives. But Sergeant Leandros presented a more complex perspective that raised troubling questions about whether Captain Titus's methods indicated dangerous independence from proper authority structures. While acknowledging his captain's tactical competence and personal courage, Leandros expressed concerns about the frequency with which successful outcomes had required deviation from established procedures. Captain Titus consistently interpreted his orders in ways that extended beyond their literal meaning, Leandros explained during his separate interview session. His tactical innovations were effective, but they often involved approaches that the Codex Astartes would classify as unacceptably risky or inappropriately independent. He seemed to trust his own judgment more than institutional guidance. The testimony from surviving civilian leaders provided additional perspective on Captain Titus's conduct during the crisis. Manufactorum Overseer Helena Vex credited the captain's personal intervention with saving over 10,000 worker families who would otherwise have been killed during orc attacks on inadequately defended residential areas. Captain Titus didn't just protect our industrial facilities, Vex testified via long-range Vox transmission. He made personal efforts to ensure that our people survived the fighting. When other Imperial forces might have focused purely on military objectives, he treated civilian lives as equally important strategic assets. But the civilian testimony also revealed patterns of behavior that concerned Inquisitor Thrax's investigation team. Captain Titus had repeatedly exceeded his formal authority to make policy decisions that were properly the responsibility of higher Imperial authorities, creating precedents that could undermine command structure discipline if they were widely emulated. The technical analysis of equipment and environmental samples from Graia provided the most troubling evidence for the investigation. Captain Titus's armor and weapons showed exposure to warp energies at levels that should have required immediate medical intervention and extended purification procedures. Yet medical examinations revealed no evidence of corruption or contamination beyond what would be expected from normal combat operations. Chief Medicae Aldrich Vahn, who conducted the comprehensive medical evaluation, submitted findings that raised more questions than they answered. Captain Titus displays physiological resistance to warp contamination that exceeds normal space marine parameters. His genetic markers remain within established ranges, but his psychological profile suggests unusual resistance to supernatural influence that cannot be explained by standard conditioning procedures. The psychological evaluation revealed additional anomalies that complicated simple assessment of Captain Titus's fitness for continued service. His moral framework and tactical decision-making processes remained consistent with Ultramarines training, but his willingness to prioritize individual judgment over institutional guidance suggested potential problems with authority structures that could prove problematic in future deployments. Brother librarian Epistolary Castor, who conducted specialized psychic evaluation procedures, reported findings that were simultaneously reassuring and concerning. Captain Titus demonstrates exceptional resistance to chaos corruption and unusual clarity in moral reasoning under extreme stress. However, his independence of thought and willingness to question established procedures could indicate either exceptional wisdom or dangerous pride that might lead to future conflicts with proper authority. The investigation's most complex challenge involved evaluating Captain Titus's destruction of Inquisitor Drogon's research facility and the Psychic Scourge prototype. Standard protocols required that such materials be secured for proper analysis rather than eliminated in the field. But the tactical situation had made recovery operations impossible given available resources and time constraints. Inquisitor Thrax's analysis of the decision required balancing multiple competing considerations. The destruction had prevented Chaos forces from acquiring weapons technology that could have shifted strategic balance throughout entire sectors. But it had also eliminated potential intelligence about enemy capabilities and future plans that could have been valuable for anticipating subsequent threats. Captain Titus made tactical decisions based on incomplete information and without appropriate consultation with higher authorities, Thrax noted in his preliminary assessment. His choices proved successful in immediate terms, but they established precedents for independent action that could prove dangerous if they became standard practice among Space Marine commanders. The investigation team's review of Captain Titus's complete service record revealed patterns that had been consistent throughout his career. His tactical innovations and protective focus had always exceeded normal parameters while remaining within acceptable boundaries of Space Marine conduct. But the Graia operation had pushed those tendencies to extremes that might indicate fundamental incompatibility with institutional discipline. The formal hearings that would determine Captain Titus's fate took place aboard Inquisitor Thrax's vessel Absolute Truth, with participation from representatives of the Ultramarines chapter, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and several civilian imperial authorities whose interests had been affected by the Graia operation. The proceedings were designed to evaluate not only specific allegations, but also broader questions about appropriate limits of command authority during crisis situations. Captain Titus's own testimony provided detailed explanations of his tactical decisions and moral reasoning throughout the operation. He acknowledged that many of his choices had deviated from standard procedures, but argued that conventional approaches would have resulted in massive casualties and mission failure under the specific circumstances that had prevailed on Graia. My oath as a Space Marine requires me to protect the Emperor's people and serve the Imperium's interests, Titus explained during his primary testimony session. When those obligations come into conflict with specific procedural requirements, I believe my duty is to prioritize the spirit of my service over the letter of regulations that were designed for different circumstances. The captain's defense emphasized that his innovations had been tactical rather than strategic, representing adaptations of established principles to novel situations rather than fundamental challenges to imperial doctrine. His protection of civilian populations, coordination with loyal forces, and elimination of heretical threats were all consistent with basic Space Marine responsibilities as defined by the Codex Astartes. But Inquisitor Thrax's questioning revealed the philosophical implications of Captain Titus's approach that extended beyond simple tactical considerations. His willingness to trust personal judgment over institutional guidance suggested attitudes that could prove dangerous if they spread throughout the Space Marine chapters or other imperial military organizations. Individual conscience is important, Thrax observed during the formal examination. But institutional discipline is what allows the Imperium to coordinate responses to threats that extend across multiple sectors and campaign theaters. How do we balance personal moral responsibility with collective strategic requirements when the two come into conflict? The question addressed fundamental tensions within Imperial service that had been debated by scholars and military theorists for millennia without reaching definitive conclusions. The Graia operation had simply brought these abstract philosophical issues into sharp practical focus through specific decisions that had determined the fate of hundreds of thousands of people. Captain Titus's response demonstrated the depth of consideration he had given to these matters throughout his career. Institutional discipline is essential for coordinated action, but it must be balanced with moral judgment that ensures our actions serve the purposes that justify our authority. Blind obedience to procedures that contradict fundamental principles would make us servants of bureaucracy rather than defenders of humanity. The philosophical sophistication of this response impressed some members of the investigation panel, while concerning others who wondered whether such intellectual independence was compatible with the absolute loyalty that Space Marine service required. The debate that followed revealed deep divisions within Imperial leadership about the proper relationship between individual conscience and institutional authority. The investigation's technical analysis phase involved extensive examination of all equipment, materials, and environmental samples that had been recovered from Graia. The findings confirmed that Captain Titus had been exposed to warp contamination levels that exceeded safety parameters while displaying resistance that couldn't be explained by normal Space Marine conditioning procedures. Magos biologist Xerion 7, representing the Adeptus Mechanicus interests in the investigation, submitted findings that raised fundamental questions about Captain Titus's continued classification as a normal Space Marine. The subject demonstrates physiological and psychological responses to warp exposure that fall outside established parameters for genetically enhanced humans. While no evidence of corruption is detectable, the mechanisms underlying his resistance require investigation to determine whether they represent natural variation or artificial enhancement. These findings created additional complications for the investigation panel's deliberations. If Captain Titus's capabilities were the result of unknown genetic factors, he might represent valuable resources for understanding how to enhance Space Marine resistance to chaos corruption. But if his immunity was the result of subtle corruption that hadn't been detected by standard screening procedures, he could pose threats to Imperial security that outweighed any tactical advantages he might provide. The investigation's final phase involved consultation with the highest levels of Imperial authority, including direct communication with Terra regarding precedents for dealing with Space Marines who operated beyond normal parameters while achieving exceptional results. The responses indicated that such cases were sufficiently rare that each required individual evaluation based on specific circumstances rather than application of standardized procedures. Chapter: Master Marneus Calgar's testimony provided crucial perspective on how the Ultramarines' leadership viewed Captain Titus's conduct throughout his career. While acknowledging concerns about his tactical independence, Calgar emphasized that his results had consistently served Imperial interests, while maintaining absolute loyalty to the Emperor and fundamental Space Marine principles. Captain Titus represents the kind of innovative leadership that the Adeptus Astartes was designed to provide, Calgar testified via encrypted transmission. His methods sometimes challenge conventional wisdom, but his objectives and achievements remain consistent with our highest ideals. The Imperium needs Space Marines who can adapt to novel threats while preserving what makes our civilization worth defending. The investigation's conclusion would require balancing these competing considerations while establishing precedents that would influence how similar cases were handled in the future. The panel's decision would determine not only Captain Titus's personal fate, but also the broader question of how much tactical and moral independence the Imperium could tolerate among its most elite military forces. Chapter 8: Redemption and Legacy. The final judgment that would determine Captain Titus's fate came after 6 months of extensive investigation, deliberation, and consultation with the highest levels of Imperial authority. Inquisitor Thrax's panel had assembled evidence that painted a complex portrait of exceptional capability combined with troubling independence, requiring decisions that would influence Imperial policy regarding Space Marine autonomy for generations to come. The formal verdict was announced during a ceremony held aboard the Ultramarines battle barge Macragge's honor, with representatives from multiple Imperial institutions witnessing the resolution of what had become one of the most closely examined cases in recent Adeptus Astartes history. The proceedings were broadcast throughout Ultramar and transmitted to chapter headquarters across the galaxy as an example of how the Imperium balanced individual achievement with institutional discipline. Inquisitor Thrax delivered the panel's conclusions with characteristic precision. Captain Demetrian Titus has been found guilty of exceeding his authority on multiple occasions during the Graia operation, operating without proper consultation with higher Imperial authorities and making tactical decisions that deviated from established procedures. However, the panel also recognizes that these actions were motivated by genuine concern for Imperial interests and resulted in the preservation of critical strategic assets and civilian populations. The mixed verdict reflected the investigation's fundamental challenge: how to evaluate conduct that violated procedural requirements while achieving essential objectives that conventional approaches could not have accomplished. Captain Titus's innovations had been necessary for success under the specific circumstances that prevailed, but they had also established precedents that could prove dangerous if widely adopted. The sentence that accompanied the verdict was equally complex. Rather than simple punishment or complete exoneration, the panel had developed a framework that would allow Captain Titus to continue serving Imperial interests while addressing concerns about his tactical independence and resistance to supervision. Captain Titus will be assigned to a specialized unit operating under direct Inquisition oversight, Thrax announced. His demonstrated capabilities make him too valuable to waste, but his tendency toward independent action requires enhanced monitoring to ensure compatibility with broader Imperial objectives. This assignment will allow evaluation of whether his methods can be integrated with institutional discipline. The specialized unit, designated the Death Watch, represented the Imperium's most elite anti-Xenos forces, composed of Space Marines drawn from different chapters who operated under conditions requiring exceptional tactical flexibility and moral judgment. The assignment would place Captain Titus among warriors who shared his inclination toward innovative approaches while providing the oversight that the investigation panel considered necessary. But the sentence also included conditions that reflected continuing concerns about Captain Titus's future reliability. His service with the Death Watch would be evaluated annually, with continuation dependent on demonstrated ability to operate within appropriate authority structures while maintaining the tactical effectiveness that had characterized his previous deployments. Chapter Master Calgar's response to the verdict indicated the Ultramarines' leadership's satisfaction with the panel's balanced approach. The investigation has recognized both Captain Titus's exceptional service and the concerns that his methods have raised. The Death Watch assignment will allow him to continue serving the Emperor while addressing legitimate questions about the proper limits of command authority. The assignment ceremony that followed the verdict represented Captain Titus's formal transition from standard Ultramarine service to the specialized requirements of Death Watch operations. The ritual involved renouncing his company colors and adopting the black armor that symbolized allegiance to the Imperium as a whole rather than any specific chapter identity. Watch Captain Artemis, who would serve as Captain Titus's immediate superior within the Death Watch command structure, explained the philosophical framework that would guide his new assignment. The Death Watch operates in situations where conventional tactical doctrine provides inadequate guidance for achieving Imperial objectives. Your experience with innovation under pressure makes you well suited for missions that require adaptation to novel threats while maintaining absolute loyalty to the Emperor. The specialized training that accompanied Captain Titus's integration into Death Watch operations was designed to enhance his existing capabilities while providing frameworks for operating within institutional constraints. The curriculum included advanced tactical analysis, interagency coordination protocols, and most importantly, decision-making processes that balanced individual judgment with collective oversight. But the training also revealed that many Death Watch veterans had experiences similar to Captain Titus's challenges on Graia. The unit specifically recruited Space Marines who had demonstrated exceptional capability under conditions that pushed beyond normal operational parameters, creating a community of warriors who understood the tensions between innovation and discipline. Brother Sergeant Valerius of the Imperial Fists shared perspectives that helped Captain Titus understand how his Graia experiences fit into broader patterns of Space Marine service. Every veteran in this unit has faced situations where following established procedures would have resulted in mission failure and massive casualties. The difference between heroes and heretics is often just whether their innovations succeeded and whether they maintained focus on protecting innocent life rather than pursuing personal glory. The camaraderie that Captain Titus found among his new brothers provided psychological benefits that he hadn't expected when accepting the Death Watch assignment. Rather than feeling isolated due to his unconventional methods, he discovered that tactical innovation and moral independence were valued characteristics within the specialized unit's culture. His first mission with the Death Watch involved investigating Xenos technology that had been discovered on the frontier world of Xerion Prime, where unusual energy signatures suggested either previously unknown alien capabilities or dangerous technological fusion that could threaten Imperial interests throughout the sector. The assignment was specifically designed to test his ability to operate within enhanced oversight while applying the innovative capabilities that had made him valuable. The mission parameters reflected lessons learned from the Graia investigation. Captain Titus would have significant tactical authority for field operations, but major strategic decisions required consultation with Deathwatch Command through real-time communication protocols. The approach was designed to preserve operational flexibility while ensuring appropriate supervision of potentially problematic choices. The Xerion Prime operation proved successful beyond initial projections, with Captain Titus's tactical innovations allowing rapid identification and elimination of a Genestealer cult that had been using captured Imperial technology to develop advanced infiltration capabilities. His methods remained unconventional, but they operated within the enhanced authority structures that Deathwatch Service provided. Watch Captain Artemis's after-action report emphasized the positive aspects of Captain Titus's performance while noting areas requiring continued attention. Brother Titus demonstrated exceptional tactical capability and absolute commitment to Imperial objectives. His innovations proved crucial for mission success, while remaining within appropriate parameters for Deathwatch operations. Continued service under current oversight protocols is recommended. The success of the Xerion Prime mission led to additional assignments that gradually restored confidence in Captain Titus's ability to balance tactical innovation with institutional discipline. Over subsequent months, he participated in operations against Chaos cults, Orc invasions, and mysterious Xenos threats that required exactly the kind of adaptive thinking that had characterized his service throughout his career. But perhaps more importantly, his experience with the Deathwatch provided opportunities to develop mentorship relationships with younger Space Marines who faced similar challenges in balancing individual conscience with institutional authority. Captain Titus's guidance helped several promising warriors navigate the complexities of serving Imperial interests while maintaining personal integrity. Brother Cassius of the Blood Angels sought Captain Titus's advice regarding tactical decisions that had saved civilian lives, but violated explicit orders about prioritizing military objectives. The conversation revealed how widespread these moral dilemmas were among Space Marines serving in increasingly complex conflict environments. "I did what I believed the Emperor would want me to do," Cassius explained during one of their private discussions. "But my captain filed reports questioning whether I could be trusted to follow orders during critical situations. How do you balance personal conscience with institutional discipline when they come into conflict?" Captain Titus's response drew from his own experiences while providing guidance that could help his brother navigate similar challenges. The Emperor's will isn't always expressed through specific orders from human authorities. Sometimes, serving his vision for humanity requires choices that challenge conventional procedures. The key is maintaining focus on protecting innocent life and serving the greater good, rather than pursuing personal interests or glory. These mentorship relationships proved that Captain Titus's value extended beyond his personal tactical capabilities, to include wisdom that could benefit other Space Marines facing moral and tactical challenges. His experience with innovation under pressure provided insights that could help the Adeptus Astartes adapt to evolving threats while preserving essential principles. The broader implications of Captain Titus's rehabilitation influenced Imperial policy regarding Space Marines who operated beyond normal parameters during critical missions. His successful integration into Deathwatch operations demonstrated that exceptional capabilities could be preserved and utilized while addressing legitimate concerns about tactical independence and authority structures. Inquisitor Thrax's final assessment, submitted 2 years after the original Graia investigation, acknowledged the success of the approach that had been developed. Captain Titus has proven that innovative tactical thinking can be compatible with appropriate institutional oversight. His service record with the Deathwatch demonstrates exceptional capability while maintaining absolute loyalty to Imperial interests. The specialized unit assignment has successfully balanced individual autonomy with collective discipline. The precedent established by Captain Titus's case influenced how similar situations were handled throughout the Imperium. Space Marines who demonstrated exceptional capability combined with tactical independence were increasingly assigned to specialized units where their innovations could be valuable while receiving appropriate oversight. Chapter Master Calga's retrospective analysis emphasized the broader lessons that could be drawn from Captain Titus's career. The galaxy presents threats that require adaptive responses beyond conventional tactical doctrine. Space Marines who can innovate while maintaining moral clarity provide essential capabilities for protecting Imperial interests. The challenge is creating frameworks that preserve these capabilities while ensuring compatibility with institutional discipline. The legacy that Captain Titus established extended far beyond his individual achievements to influence how the Imperium balanced innovation with authority throughout its military organizations. His example demonstrated that exceptional individuals could serve Imperial interests while challenging conventional approaches, but only within structures that provided appropriate guidance and oversight. Years later, training materials used throughout the Adeptus Astartes included case studies drawn from Captain Titus's career, emphasizing both his tactical innovations and the institutional frameworks that had allowed him to continue serving effectively despite early conflicts with established procedures. His story became an example of how individual excellence could be preserved while addressing legitimate concerns about military discipline. The final assessment that defined Captain Titus's place in Imperial history came from his own reflections on the choices that had shaped his career. During a private interview conducted for historical archives, he summarized the principles that had guided his service. A Space Marine's duty is to protect the Emperor's people and serve his vision for humanity. Sometimes that requires innovation beyond conventional procedures, but it always requires maintaining focus on what makes our civilization worth defending. That philosophy, tested through decades of service in situations that pushed beyond normal operational parameters, represented Captain Titus's enduring contribution to Imperial military culture. He had demonstrated that tactical excellence and moral integrity could coexist with institutional discipline when appropriate frameworks were developed to balance competing requirements. His legacy lived on in the Space Marines he had mentored, the tactical innovations that became standard procedures, and the policy frameworks that allowed the Imperium to preserve exceptional capabilities while maintaining necessary discipline. Captain Titus had shown that individual conscience and institutional authority could work together when both remained focused on serving humanity rather than pursuing narrow interests. The Servo-Skull archives that preserve these records document Captain Titus as one of the most underrated Space Marines in Imperial history, a warrior whose greatest achievements were not his tactical victories, but his demonstration that innovation and discipline could reinforce rather than conflict with each other when properly integrated through institutional wisdom and personal integrity. Epilogue. As I compile these final data fragments into coherent narrative, the morning light of Macragge illuminates the Hall of Heroes, where Captain Titus's service record stands among the honored dead. But this record tells only part of his story, the official version sanitized for public consumption and institutional comfort. The complete truth reveals a more complex legacy that continues influencing Imperial military doctrine decades after his formal recognition. Captain Titus proved that exceptional individuals could challenge conventional wisdom while serving larger purposes, but only when their innovations remained grounded in moral principles that transcended personal ambition. His example inspired generations of Space Marines to embrace tactical innovation while maintaining absolute commitment to protecting innocent life. The balance he achieved between individual conscience and institutional authority became a model for leadership that preserved both effectiveness and integrity under the most challenging circumstances. The Death Watch continues recruiting Space Marines whose capabilities extend beyond normal parameters, using frameworks developed from Captain Titus's experience to integrate exceptional individuals into institutional structures. His rehabilitation demonstrated that innovation and discipline could reinforce each other when properly balanced through wise leadership and appropriate oversight. But perhaps his greatest legacy lies in the recognition that heroism sometimes requires challenging established procedures in service of higher principles. Captain Titus showed that true loyalty meant serving the Emperor's vision for humanity rather than simply following orders that might conflict with moral obligations. The galaxy remains dangerous, filled with threats that require adaptive responses beyond conventional tactical doctrine. Space Marines trained according to principles that Captain Titus helped establish continue protecting Imperial interests while preserving the human values that make protection worthwhile. His story reminds us that individual conscience and institutional authority both serve essential functions in preserving civilization. The tension between them need not be destructive when both remain focused on protecting innocent life and serving purposes larger than narrow self-interest. Captain Demetrian Titus of the Ultramarines became legend, not through perfect adherence to established procedures, but through perfect commitment to the principles that made those procedures meaningful. In a universe where following rules might sometimes conflict with doing right, he chose to do right while finding ways to honor both individual conscience and collective wisdom. The Emperor protects those who protect others, especially when protection requires courage to challenge conventional approaches in service of unconventional threats. Captain Titus embodied that courage, demonstrating that true strength comes from moral clarity rather than simple obedience to authority. Some heroes are celebrated for their victories. Others are remembered for their sacrifices. The greatest heroes are those who show us how to remain human while serving purposes larger than humanity. And Captain Titus earned his place among them through choices that honored both innovation and integrity.